Hello, I'm Peter Montgomery, that had the unique experience of flatting and living with Norman Bennett at 18 Bridgewater Road, and generally getting an education like no other. That's from Norm Bennett, I mean. During most of the time I was there, Jonathan was there also, and I saw him grow from a young man starting out at Auckland Grammar and then going on beyond. When Norm sent an email regarding Jonathan on the Sunday the 12th of April, he said it to Peter Francis and myself. Hi Pete and Pete. Jenny, Jonathan's sister, phoned me this evening. It is with deep regret that I advised that Jonathan passed away in his London apartment in his sleep last night. So that was a shock. And then Norm followed that up again with an email on Friday 17 April. For those of you who are not aware of it, Jonathan died of heart failure, peacefully in his sleep last Friday 10 April. In conjunction with his sister Jenny, who lives in Melbourne, a testimonial function honouring Jonathan will be held as follows, and we get all the detail, so here we are today. Many of you have made a big effort to travel and or to prepare words to reflect and farewell Jonathan. May I acknowledge the huge contribution from Norm Bennett. Norm at his chillingly efficient best at the downtown service station, and he, along with Gerard Wade and Rick Corbell, formed the JJ Hibbs committee, and Norm was made communications manager. Just let me show you quickly. This is Norm Bennett, communications manager. Background on speakers, reference timetable, it goes on for pages. Reading of Desmond, speakers and speeches. Anyway, that's enough. But you get the picture that Norm has done a huge amount to honour the young man. We know that Norm was famous at 18 Bridgewater Road, and I saw firsthand often how good he was to so many young people, and some of them who either needed help in whatever way, some really on their way in life, others definitely hit the dark side of the moon, and Norm was able to help them in so many ways, and he did a brilliant job as he did with Jonathan. Now, before we go on, I had it all neatly here before I outsmarted myself. And please excuse me, but dear oh dear, I had the apologies, and here they are, right under page 2. Right, so email messages of condolences and apologies received from Liz Akel, Wakatani, Willie Akel, Auckland, John Arkle, Coffs Harbour, New South Wales, Cam Bennett, Sydney, New South Wales, Chris Eve from Cairns in Queensland, Karen Fikert from Devonport, Ash Gibb, England, Nick Gurr from Perth, WA, Bronwyn Hibbs from Gisborne, Philip Hobbs from Cairns, Queensland, Ian Littler from Auckland, Dave and Vicky McIntosh from Tauranga, Pauline Muir from Taupo, Wilson Mackay from Thursday Island, Queensland, Garth and Judy Swinburne from Mildura, Victoria, Scott and Simon Woolley, and John Arvidsson, and sadly for them, because people have made an effort, I know, there was a flight out of Gisborne cancelled this morning and not able to make it. Carol Raymond, Denise Raymond, Sharon Raymond and Peter Smith. So disappointment there. Anyway, we've got a lot to get through. So first, can I ask Jonathan's nephew Gerard Wade to speak? Gerard is Jonathan's sister's Stephanie's son. So here's Gerard Wade.
Thank you, Peter. Just before I start Jonathan's eulogy, I want to tell a story about this rugby ball. Wendy Carling, bless her, was determined that some of Jonathan's ashes were going to be with us today, and she was conscious of bureaucracy and wanted to circumvent the New Zealand Customs Service. So she cunningly put some of Jonathan's ashes in this rugby ball and DHL'd it to us just last weekend. So Jonathan's with us today. On behalf of Jonathan's family, we would like to thank you all for being here today to acknowledge and reminisce a life less ordinary. In particular, we want to thank MC PJ Montgomery and the speakers to follow, who will all share their stories of how Jonathan touched and changed their lives. We also want to thank Debbie Carling, who has travelled here from Australia to represent Wendy and the larger Carling family. Sorry, you can see I'm a bit nervous. A family who played such an enormous part in the last 30 years of Jonathan's life. Jonathan James Hibbs, born 9th of August 1957. Jonathan was the third child and only son of Dr. Douglas and Janice Hibbs. He had two older sisters, Stephanie and Jenny, and a younger sister, Bronwyn. All the siblings were born in the east coast town of Gisborne. Jonathan was also the much-loved uncle of myself, Rebecca, Emma and Lisa, Stephanie's children. He was also the very loved uncle of Jenny's daughter, Jenna, and the much-loved uncle of Sachi, who was Bronwyn's daughter. Jonathan also has 4 great nieces, some of whom he has met, and unfortunately some who he will sadly never meet. They are Rebecca's daughter, Abigail, Janet's daughters, Ruby and Lulu, and Emma's daughter, Rowena. Jonathan's childhood was one from a bygone era where children were allowed to be just that. All the siblings talk of fond memories exploring, climbing trees, cycling and walking to school, rope swings into Gisborne's rivers at the family home. Jenny shared with me a memory she has with Jonathan and the 3 sisters climbing a tree one day. Jonathan actually fell out of the tree and knocked himself clean unconscious. Jenny has fond memories of the 3 sisters racing into the house, screaming at the top of their lungs that Jonathan was dead. Needless to say, Jonathan had many more mishaps through his life, but perhaps that first head injury was a sign of things to come.
Yeah.
There are also many summers with picnics at the beach surrounded by cousins and extended family. There was also lots of swimming and food. Suffice to say, there was a real sense of adventure and independence. Later in his childhood, Douglas and Janice were to separate, and Jonathan would eventually have a stepfather, Dr. Desdales, and a stepmother, Merlene. Douglas and Merle went on to have 3 sons, Jonathan's half-brothers, David, Alan, and Peter. Janice, Des and Jonathan with his sisters moved to Auckland for a period while Des was advancing his medical career. When his mother and stepfather decided to move back to Gisborne, Jonathan remained in Auckland for high school. And so ended a family friend, Norman Bennett, in Jonathan's life. Jonathan was to live with Norm throughout his high school years. Norm, who by the way is my godfather, was to prove an enormous presence in Jonathan's life. How's that for timing, Norm? I arranged that. Auckland grammar mates will embellish on these years a little later today. Well, he never said as much to me. I'm sure having both a father and a stepfather as doctors influenced Jonathan's decision to enrol in Otago Medical School after graduating from Auckland Grammar. Norman's told me a great story about Jonathan and his good mate Ashley Gibb from Auckland Grammar, who were both having dinner at the Gibb family home just before relocating to Dunedin to study medicine. Ashley's father, Dr. Gerald Gibb, mentored the boys at the dinner and said to them both, and I quote, "Forget women, forget drinking, forget sport, just focus on passing year 1 intermediate exams for medical school and you're in." End quote. Well, they both failed year 1. Jonathan then applied for and was accepted into Otago Dental School, where he flourished. Jonathan ended his time at Otago as president of the Otago Dental School Students Association. Upon moving back to Auckland, Jonathan joined the practice of Balmoral Dental Centre, working with Dr. Alan Baker. Later, he was to move to Whangarei and work with Dr. Laurie Brett. In 1985, Jonathan moved to the UK, where he was to reside for most of the rest of his life. Not long after moving to the UK, Jonathan met Wendy Carling. To say they were soulmates sounds like a cliche, but in this case, it is true. Wendy protected Jonathan, and likewise, Jonathan protected Wendy. Jenny's daughter, Jana, knew Jonathan and Wendy's relationship better than anyone in the family through her time living with her husband, Aaron, in London. She has written me the following. London and Wendy have been Jonathan's home for longer than not. They were kindred spirits and soulmates. Despite many forces working against them, Jonathan and Wendy were inseparable to the end. The thought of them being separated now is heartbreaking. They were 2 purely unique human beings who managed beyond all preconceptions of what a loving relationship looks like to forge a union that represented and worked for them and them alone. They never conformed or tried to make things look pretty. They were who they were, no matter who was looking. Chances are no one else could have tolerated either of them long term, but they were made for each other.
They were.
They looked after each other in the ways that no one else could, and above all else, they loved each other deeply. Other speakers to follow will embellish on this, including Wendy's triplet sister Debbie. Jonathan's family do wish to convey this. With Jonathan's passing, Wendy and the Carling family have done their utmost to respect Jonathan's family and his ancestry. We are profoundly proud and thankful to see pictures of the all-black coffin at Jonathan's UK funeral with the silver fern motif and the Maori poems painted onto the casket. Jonathan was based at Harley Street in London for a period before eventually establishing his own practice at Slough, not far from Heathrow. It should be noted Jonathan was respected for his crown and bridge work throughout his time in the UK. Jonathan and Wendy did move to New Zealand for a couple of years in the early 90s. Wendy enrolled at Auckland University, while Jonathan again worked at Balmoral Dental Centre. While they notionally lived in an apartment at Stanley Point in Devonport, I'm fairly certain they ate just about every meal either at my mum's house in Vauxhall Road in Devonport or at Mark and Gail's house in Albert Road in Devonport. In fact, I doubt the kitchen at Stanley Point was ever used. During Jonathan's first time in the UK and after he and Wendy returned from their time in New Zealand, Jonathan travelled extensively. There was always lots of sailing, a lifelong passion of Jonathan's, and many boat charters in the Mediterranean and elsewhere. Another milestone for Jonathan was owning his apartment freehold in Bayswater in London. For those of you who have knowledge of the London property scene, that was quite an achievement. Jonathan's last two times in New Zealand were profoundly sad, but in the same way uplifting. Same time uplifting. The first was for the funeral of Jonathan's mother, our Grand Janice. The second was for his sister Stephanie, my mother's passing in 2010. On both occasions, we never said it outright to each other, but there was an implied message in our conversations. Somehow, after it all, you have to start breathing again. There's another important step. You need to learn to laugh again. And that we did. And today we will reminisce, but we will also learn to laugh again.
Now we move right along, and it's my pleasure now to invite and introduce Wiki Oman, Jonathan's first cousin from Rotorua. Wiki.
Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Ke mā kina ki ota, ki mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Tēnā koutou everyone, greetings and thank you so much for coming. This is Jonathan's beautiful sister, Jenny, my first cousin. Jonathan was the same age as my brother, John, who passed 15 years ago. And I'm sure they'll be having a good catch-up over there on the other side. That poem, that whakatoki really, karakia, is from our Te Atiawa tribe from Taranaki, down the top of the South Island. And it was also, that poem was read at his service funeral in London. So our thoughts are with Wendy and the family there that can't be with us today. And our thoughts are with our ancestors who are with us and with Jonathan and all the rest of our family that have passed on. And we're here to represent our friends and family who couldn't make it today. Most of our Bennett family live in Rotorua, and all our Gisborne family, where we were born. My mum remembers being pregnant at the same time as Auntie Jan with Jonathan and John, and so we had some early years growing up together as cousins, and our most fondest memories were going back there to Auntie Jan's house. It was so full of love and manaakitanga and beautiful times, food and beach, and yeah, we were lucky kids. I'm going to, first I want to say just something personally that happened when I got the message from Jenny the early evening before. I just felt myself, like having a little nap. And I just felt Auntie Jan so present, and I was like taken back into that beautiful home at the beach at Makarori. And and I thought, wow, I just hadn't had that connection with Auntie Jan so long. And I think, they say that they come as messengers to tell you when something happens, like someone close in the family passes over. So that felt like a real blessing. And I felt Jonathan in the early hours of this morning too. So I know he's with us. And as Māori, we understand that, we have Mauri, that's our life essence, and Wairua, spirit. And when we die, our Mauri goes back to source, to Io, God, universal energy. But our spirits, our two parts to our Wairua, our spirits, one of them stays with our ashes or our body, and the other crosses over to the spirit world to continue its journey of healings and teachings until we reincarnate again, until we don't have to reincarnate anymore, become like angels. But anyway, so that's just my understanding of where he's at. So he's partly with us and also looking down from the other side. So he will be a comfort, and now he's crossed over, he will be a kaitiaki or guardian for those in the family that he's left behind. So I just want to talk a little bit about our family history and what bloodlines Jonathan has on his dad's side, and we're really sorry Doug can't be here today. He's in his 90s, and his dad, and quite frail, but Mel's here, I believe, as wife. And on his side, he has Scottish and English blood. And on the Māori side, we have the same Māori grandmother, Rawinia. We have, her father was the first Māori bishop in New Zealand, our great-grandfather, Bishop Frederick Bennett, or Perenika Penati. And he was an Irish Māori, and he passed in 1950. And if you're ever down at Ohinemutu, that's our ancestral village in Rotorua, if you go into the Māori carved church there, St Faith's, he's buried up there beside the altar. And his first wife, our great-grandmother, Hannah Park, she's buried at the front of the church, guarding the church, and the second wife's buried at the back of the church. And altogether, great-grandpa had 18 children. And so our grandmother was the eldest of the 18. And then she had 3 children, my dad, Gerald, who Gerard's named after, and Jan and Peter. And all the grandmothers are all buried. One's on Makoia Island, our great-great-great-grandmother, and another one at Kauai. And on our great-grandmother, Hannah's side, on the Tiatiawa side, we descend from quite an illustrious Tito Kawaru, who was a famous strategist in the war, and he was our great-great-grandfather, Huta Pamariki Paka. He was brought up as a child with his uncle, who was Tito Kawaru, and it was said that he was in the tree when Bontemsky was shot. So I'm not sure who shot him, but anyway. And then of course we descend from Te Whiti o Rongomai and Tohu Kakihi. So especially Te Whiti, he was a famous pacifist chief, and even Mahatma Gandhi was inspired by him. So we were one of the tribes that didn't fight, and so we're very proud to be descended from that line. So and also we have Scottish blood also on that side. So Jonathan had a lot of Scottish, Maori, English. Oh, and great Jimmy Boy, or Pam Pam, our grandfather, he was Welsh, and I've still got his Welsh name, Oman. So he had Welsh as well. Yeah. So he was a real cocktail, really, Jonathan. Yeah. So I'm hope he's having a few over there, and we'll have a few after this. So thank you everyone for coming again, especially all the people that have travelled from overseas. Jenny lives in Melbourne, and you're from
Sydney,
Sydney, and people that have come from the South Island, and thank you so much, and thank you Norm for organising this for us. Wonderful to have this celebration for him. And I'd just like to finish with a little karakia for Jonathan. Kia tautaranga Māori, kia horahia te marino, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, kia tere te karohirohi, I mua I tō hurahi ai. So that's it. May peace be always with you and the calm be widespread. The sea will always glisten like green stone, and the sun will always dance across your path.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Kia ora koutou.
That's beautiful.
Thank you, Wiki Oman, and very nice to see Jonathan's sister Jenny as well. So, from family members, now we are representing Wendy in London as Debbie Carling, Wendy's sister. Wendy was Jonathan's partner, and Debbie is Wendy's triplet sister.
Testing. Wendy was the extrovert. I'm here representing Wendy as her DNA, I've decided, and it's lovely to meet you all. It's also very nice to get this side, an element to Jonathan, which is bringing a picture of him. It's a fuller picture now, and I'm really enjoying being here with our boy. But this isn't about me, this is about Jonathan and Wendy and all the loved ones directly around us. As you all already know, Wendy was Jonathan's partner for 24 happy years, right up to the end of his life. These are the words that she's asked for me to read on her behalf. She did nearly make it, actually. She just didn't quite have the energy to get here, but she will get here in the next few months, I imagine. So this is from Wendy. I'm sorry that I can't be there to deliver these words in person, especially as New Zealand was so important to Jonathan as an individual and to the two of us as a couple. In some ways it seems appropriate to talk about Jonathan in this way, as the distance in those silver blue eyes were also reflected in his personality. However well we knew him, he was always to some extent unreachable. This was particularly true after the loss of Stephanie, who I believe was probably the only person who truly understood every side of him. As for me, I first met him when he came to work for my father near London, and in his instinctive Kiwi way, he greeted me by reminding me that he was staying in my bedroom and never seemed to consider the possibility that I wouldn't like him. But it was only when the two of us went to visit New Zealand together that I began to see the extent of his brilliance. It was here that I fell deeply in love with him. Contrary to anyone I had ever met in England, he was a man who had no barriers whatsoever. But instead of making him seem vulnerable, it reinforced his sense of security. This was the same side of him that gave him a reputation for bolting. If he got bored at a party, he would just leave immediately without telling anyone. We've all seen that side of him. My father had seen that he was a talented and capable dentist as he used to say, who built a relationship of trust and friendship with everyone of his patients. In a reversal of the usual way of things, children used to ask their mothers if they were allowed to go to the dentist, whilst his relationship with his adult patients was pretty clear from the number of bottles of wine that would be given to him every Christmas. Part of his professional charm was his ability to turn around the usual dynamic so that clients would always ask him about what was happening with his life, as well as the other way around. Hey, little one. He was a master of work-life balance, provided you didn't expect him to work before Tuesday morning or after Thursday morning, or for that matter, any time after 2 p.m. His ability to put himself in other people's shoes in the dental clinic was in marked contrast to his behaviour on the roads, where he drove like a maniac, even and perhaps especially when he was in the passenger seat. He would probably want me to mention his love of flowers, a love of which he inherited from his exceptional mum. But it's safe to say that his taste was not always the same as mine, and I would often come back home after a trip to discover that he had a flash of inspiration and painted a whole section of the house bright green or red. He also had an instinctive ability to play with words, and his sense of humour ranged from the sophisticated to the very, very crude. Oh yes. I will never forget the Valentine's card, for instance, where he crossed out "I love you" and instead wrote that I should get lost with considerably more of his favourite swear words. It might be easy to mistake this for a lack of affection, but there was never any doubt of our love. And I loved him. All the more for being beyond comprehension to most English people. I promised I'd keep this together for Wendy, but there's a triplet I can feel this for her. Many of you will know that there is a history of heart disease in the family, and in retrospect there were signs that Jonathan was not well. Even so, his departure was quick, and it seems likely that he won't have suffered. I miss him dreadfully, but I couldn't be happier to have shared his life. And I know that he would be happy to return to New Zealand, albeit in a rugby ball. I hope your memories of him are as happy as mine.
Nice. I don't know how to film it off.
Thank you, Debbie. Debbie Carling, Wendy's sister. Two speakers. Can I ask, please, for Peter Francis and Tim Gurr? Hello, hello, are they here? No, they're not. We shouldn't be surprised, Norm. Anyway, Peter Francis and Tim Gurr lived at 18 Bridgewater Road, and they knew Jonathan well, and they were going to talk about his days. Who knows, they still might arrive, you know, you never know, they still might, so we'll keep the spot clear for Peter Francis and Tim Gurr. But what I would say, being ringside as them, is that it was quite obvious that Jonathan was bright. From his early days at Auckland Grammar, you just sensed that he really had an intellect that had to be harnessed. And Norm was brilliant at that as well, in doing that. But hopefully they, and as part of the education that I talked about by living flatting with Norm Bennett, then Jonathan was exposed to that as well. I'll never forget one Friday night at Bridgewater Road. Jonathan had some of his friends around from Ags, and the next morning, the next day, the first 15 were playing Mount Albert Grammar. And they all tried to tell me that the head of Auckland Grammar at the time, John Graham, a former All Black captain and prominent All Black, said, if it gets tough out there, boys, just put the boot in. I couldn't believe it that the head of Auckland Grammar had got to that stage, but they convinced me, and I still believe it all these years later. Anyway, someone who may counteract that and have a different point of view, talking about his days at Auckland Grammar School, is Steve Hart, close friend of Jonathan from days at Auckland Grammar. Steve, were you part of that, listening to John Graham telling you to do that?
I was there that time.
You were that time. It was true.
Good afternoon, everybody, and it's great to be here at the Varsity Rugby Club, one of the old haunts back in the day. Second Black Restricted was our team, and Norm Bennett our coach, and many happy memories of that time. Can you hear me all right? I've been asked to say a few words about our old mate, Jonathan James Hibbs, and our memories of the time at Auckland Grammar way back in the early 1970s. Who can forget that cheeky young lad from Gisborne, beginning his third form year in 1971, free-spirited, lippy, and basically a complete smart-ass like the rest of us. We all thought we knew way more than the prefects and teachers did, and the world was our oyster, and had a shared delight in creating mayhem and general shit-stirring at every opportunity. And Jono was our champion in this vital area. A true pioneer, as they say. Sure, he got whacked regularly for his efforts, much to our grim satisfaction. But he also got away with murder at times due to that cheeky country boy grin, a good heart and sound native rat cunning. I certainly copped a few beatings on his behalf, which was all part of the fun in those days. Along with a few other grammar mates, many of whom here today, Jono and I quickly decided that our priorities did not revolve around hard work and contemplative studies, but rather in the fields of sport, music and chasing young frauleins around the party circuit. We would all meet at Norm's home in Parnell, where Jonathan lived with his guardian at that time, crack a few cold cans of Foster's and plan our strategy. Don't believe what you hear today. It's worse than that, probably. And it was there that our education began, as you've heard already. I don't remember a lot of it, but it was something to do with spa pools and saunas, and we were all great swimmers by the time we'd finished. Suffice to say, however, there were many great parties, new records, and fine concerts to attend. Our music takes us through the years, as they sang, and Jono was our expeditionary in this field as well, introducing us all to the likes of Echo and the Bunnymen, Joy Division and The Clean. No doubt you'll hear more on this today from others. And it wasn't just listening to new bands where our mate led the way. Unusually for a grammar lad, he loved his art and literature. He was always a great reader. Penthouse, Playboy, Rolling Stone, etc. Now, who can forget those legendary trips to Gisborne to visit his dear departed mum Jan? 6 of us piling into Norm's new BMW, armed with mountains of grog, ready to employ our top gear skills by driving his car through the rivers of the Waiweka Gorge, just to see if it had 4-wheel drive. It didn't. How we survived those car trips, I'll never know. Anyway, Jonathan and I would always help Jan out with some art exhibition she would be holding in Gisborne. As assembled guests would arrive at Ulverstone Castle, we would scale the towers at the entrance and surprise those guests with an impromptu rain shower from above. High art indeed, Jono would tell them. Certainly the high part was apt. And so this cheeky young lad from the East Coast was our bright star during those grammar years. Breaking all the rules, riding motorbikes, driving his dear old ma to distraction, and cracking copious cold tubes of beer, while daring his mates to join him and refuse at their peril. This would lead to fights quite often because he was a scrawny fellow and you'd go down heavily. No matter how irritating this could be at times, he always maintained that cheeky grin and a generosity of spirit. As I said before, Jono was a great reader in those school years, embracing poetry, Shakespearean plays and many of the old classics. He introduced us all to a favourite, Jack Kerouac, in his book On the Road. And a quote from the ghost of Dean Moriarty in that story: keep the river on your right and the highway at your shoulder. Keep the front lights in your sight, pioneer. Keep your eyes on the road, remember what you told her. This is all in code, my dear. So nobody knows where you are now, Jonathan James Hibbs, our bright star, our pioneer. But wherever that is, be at peace. You will be remembered by family, friends and colleagues for a very long time to come. Thank you all for sharing these memories.
Jonathan and I scraped into dental school, and the dental school is a very imaginative place. So Healy and Hibbs, being close together, were put into that alphabetical group. So we stayed there for 4 years. We got on quite well, which was a surprise really. They pointed out that we were quite strong-willed young men, and to say we clashed on occasions would be an understatement. Now, as fine and upstanding gentleman as he was, Jonathan was a crap card player. Once a month I'd come over to our place, my wife and I were living together, unmarried unfortunately at that time, in sin you might call it. Anyway, we were there. Licked would come over as well. They'd take a bottle of rum over each, proceed to drink the whole lot. My wife would drink water, I would drink copious amounts of beer, she'd take all the money. Then she took their keys, they couldn't go home, so they had to go and sleep together on the same bed. They had nothing left really by the time they left, no humility. It was just, all I can remember is waking up in the middle of the night and Hibbs yelling out at the top of his voice, "For Christ's sake, Liggs, get your arm off me, you bastard!" And that would happen on a regular basis. But we scraped through, we got through dental school, we didn't have any specials, which was pretty good, outstanding achievement really for Hibs and myself. We played rugby together, we drank at the Cook together, and then we made a momentous decision to move to the bowling green. It was an extra 10 to 15 metres in another direction, but we made it. Every second Friday night we'd proceed to try and steal Dot's piano from the bowling green. It was a tiny door, it was never going to get through, but when you're getting that pissed, it didn't matter really, it was a good attempt. And we graduated, and I stayed in Dunedin for another year. Hibs came up north. I went to the UK, he followed us over, came to stay with us in Sevenoaks in Kent. And then we did a bit of travelling together. He lived in London, and he lived in a bed sit. And when I say a bed sit, it was the bed you couldn't sit. There was no room for anything but the bed. It was a great thrill when he finally bought his apartment. My wife loved that. She thought that was fantastic. He had a separate bedroom we could stay in, so we were up there. He came down to Kent, and we had a lot of fun times together. A very memorable trip around Scotland. Hibs was no better at drinking whiskey than he was at drinking rum. So our trip around Scotland was very entertaining, and luckily my wife did a lot of driving. We had a fantastic night with Steve Hart in Edinburgh. The three of us sleeping on the floor while that person over there managed to scone the bed, which I thought was unfortunate. But anyway, it was a great trip. I enjoyed all the times I had with Jonathan. Fond memories. He's sadly missed, and I'm sure he's travelling well.
Hello everybody, and it's actually great to fill in a lot of gaps here today, because it was a common question when all our classmates would get together, is anyone any news of Jono? And unfortunately there was never any up-to-date news. So the mystery of Jono's recent life path remained, and it's great to have it filled in here. But the main reason I'm here, and probably most of you are here, we've got a great fondness for him. Really, really lovely guy. I flattered with Jono in fourth year at dental school. That was 1980. When you're young, you're not all that inquisitive about your friends' background or whānau or school years. We were too busy with immediate interactions. But I did know that Norm was in the background, and it's great that he's got this together today. It's especially now that I hanker more to know more about Jono. Anyway, Jono and I lived in Gladstone Road, flat in the northeast valley of Dunedin, with two women, both fierce feminist art students. Needless to say, their opinions and stance could really rile Jonathan into some vigorous verbal jousting. But Sally and Carola could never take offence to Jono. There's never an ounce of malice in him. His grin, charm and cheekiness, which other people have mentioned, would always win them over. They must have quite loved him in their own way, because I did hear that they ended up giving him a double back massage. Something I was never charming enough to achieve. Jono and I kind of led independent social lives from one another and from our classmates at dental school. Jono had a reputation as the Hunter S. Thompson of the class, and that was borne out by the state of the car he drove. It was a pretty classy gold Cortina Ghia, and that was one step up from the normal Cortina, and would have been pretty good as a student transporter back in those days. But a look in the back seat, especially after one of his road trips to the North Island, the detritus of cans and the smell of dope was evidence of his wild, swaggering ways. His mischief and partying, however, never affected his presentation at the clinic on Monday morning. Fourth year had a heavy clinical emphasis, and Jono was diligent and scrubbed up well for his patients. He may have been a little bit ruddy in the face, but he generally scrubbed up well. My weekend life mostly involved the burgeoning
Dunedin live music scene, and it was those flying nun luminaries between the Chills and the Verlaines. And I had trouble convincing Jono just how brilliant this stuff was. But I remember the breakthrough came when I brought home a newly released Cramps record. This was surprising, given that they were the most ramshackle and primitive, loose rockabilly outfit that ever was. The ice was broken, and I went on to share a lot of my other vinyl with him. And I did get him to a clean gig. One other common thing we shared, along with many other uni blokes of that era, was a chronic frustration and the lack of a girlfriend. I was always pretty mild-mannered, so that year with him was a perfect foil for me. Jono was passionate, cheeky, opinionated, and in retrospect, lovable. So that year for me was bloody good fun. It was bloody good fun to be around. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Lou Matheson, and I met Jono as a result of my friendship with Greg Gibb. And I remember the first time that Jono arrived in Dunedin. I think he turned up in a grey BMW driven by Norm. And being a lad from the deep south, I don't think I'd ever seen a BMW before then. And Jono tried to convince me that BMW stood for Betrayed My Wife. Anyway, later that night, we about 20 of us went out to a meal at a Chinese restaurant. And this was quite a big affair, and the array of dishes was endless, and it was all washed down by copious amounts of alcohol. And as the evening wore on, it dawned on me that this was going to be a fairly expensive affair, and even if 20 of us split the bill, it was going to hurt a great deal. So at the end of the evening, when it was time to go, Norm muttered something to Jono, who disappeared, and came back shortly with a briefcase, which he handed to Norm. And Norm twiddled the dials and popped the briefcase, and out came a bundle of cash, which was handed to Jono, who went up and squared the bill up, and away we went. And that was an amazing act of generosity on Norm's part, and I remember that to this day. But some of that generosity, I'm sure, rubbed off on Jono, because as I remember Jono, he was a very generous guy, and he would give you the shirt off his back if he thought that you needed it more than he did. Then, of course, we've already heard a bit about Jono's love of music, and I remember Jono was really into Fleetwood Mac and Jefferson Starship, and I think the first time I heard Grace Slick was when I was around at Jono's, and I still remember now hearing her sing White Rabbit, and the hairs on the back of my neck standing up when I heard that. Well, a couple of days later, Jono comes up to me and hands me a cassette tape that he'd done, and he'd recorded all this amazing music for me. And here I'd only known the guy for a short time, but there's another act of amazing generosity on Jono's part, the act of a true friend. I can remember Jono as being an easy guy to get on with. He was always good company. But there was another side to him as well, and that came about when I remember once having a bit of a debate with him about something. I forget what the topic was. But Jono obviously firmly believed in his point of view on this particular matter. And he wasn't going to budge, and he just debated this right to the bitter end. And even at the end of it, he wouldn't agree to disagree. He just hung in there, and that was it. And that's the way our Jono was. Sometimes, in fact, Jono could even be brutally honest with you, couldn't he? And who would forget those steely blue eyes that sometimes looked right into you? Well, thank you, everyone. That's all I've got to say. And farewell, Jono. Wherever you are, mate, I'm sure we'll meet up again at some other stage. Thank you.
I heard it said earlier that Jonathan worked somewhere else. I thought I gave him this first job, and I can stand corrected on that. Anyway, I remember sending the application down to the advertisement down to the dental school saying, "Fun in the sun, come and work in Whangarei," you know. And I had no hesitation in hiring Jonathan because of his impressive letter of application and his CV. The fact that he was the only applicant had something to do with it as well. And of course he did know everything about dentistry, and we had many a lively debate about what could and should be done in the practice. But he was very open to new ideas, Jonathan, and we had a very successful year together, and I cherish that memory. In fact, I had a very pleasant reminder of Jonathan just this morning at the Whangarei produce market. I was greeted by one of the long-term patients in the practice, and there smiling at me were the 2 porcelain crowns that Jonathan did for that person 33 years ago. So that's a testament to his clinical ability. We shared the love of music, as has been said already, and I used music a lot in the surgery, and I had his surgery piped in with music as well, and that was source of some pretty lively debate too, because I'd be playing a lovely quiet Mozart violin concerto for my elderly lady who I was treating, and next second them and Lou Reed, Satellite of Love at volume 10, crashing through the wall, joy of vision, oh my goodness. But no one minded, and the staff loved him. He loved the staff too, I'd have to say. And, we had a great time together. Of course, it wasn't all hard work and grinding away at the dentistry. We had a great deal of fun together. We both loved the sea, and I being a very keen surfer, and the first thing Jonathan did when he got up there was to buy a windsurfer. So we used to go out there a lot. And on the way to the beach, the interior of the vehicle would be thoroughly fumigated. And when it came time to clear the air, we would make what you could call a joint professional decision to clear the air by turning the valve on the nitrous oxide cylinder. Did we really do that? How we managed to get in the water and stand up safely. But yeah, we had a great time. Jonathan was a kind, generous, fun-loving man, and I cherish his memory. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Norm, also for getting us all here today, and for the opportunity to get up and say something today. Bloody Hips has gone to a huge extreme to come and hang out with his mates for a night. But, I mean, the ball, bizarre. There's Hips and the ball, the Jonathan James 007 Rugby Ball of Fame. Do we get to kick him around, Moto? I've watched a hell of a lot of rugby with Jono. He's a mad keen rugby fan. Every All Black game in the UK, I'd try and get around, and we'd go around there, and he'd proceed to tell me how every halfback in every team would remind me of me. Jeez, it reminds me of me. You spend this season, look at that bloody scary bugger. It reminds me of me. But I ended up hanging out with Jono, and I was there when he broke his shoulder. He tripped up down his one step. Maybe on the way to the fridge, I'm not sure. But he broke his shoulder, and while he did his physio, I said, I'll run your practice for you, you'll be right. So Wendy and I would go out with his practice, we'd come back, and John will be heavy on the couch doing his physio. I think he had a pint of decaf chamomile, something like that, and a pint, for the weight. And you come in the door and say, "Make this look, take the physio." Put on this horrible pained expression. He'd reach out and grab his head and say, "That's enough physio for one day." But it did me a good chance to go out and see what a damn fine dentist he was, and how much his patients loved him. He's a pretty unique chairside man, Johnny. He'd just get up, and when he'd finished, and he'd look back and go, "Jesus, that's good. Christ, I'm brilliant. Bloody hell, you're lucky I say that." That's just like out of a textbook. Oh, okay, John, thanks very much. We'll see you next week. Yeah, maybe. I don't know if you saw, seen a bunch of the photos going around of his casket out at, howdy Deb?
Hello.
Out at Deb and Sally and Wendy's parents' house out in Barcher. You know, he was there having his UK tonguey, and loads of friends and a phenomenal amount of patients all turned up to take part, and great deal of love and respect for Jonathan. It was quite a real family kind of family affairs practice, and you felt like that. A lot of love there, and I was around with Greg and Sue Gibb the other day, and Sue pulled out the album and all these old photos in it. I've been I don't know that photo was a beauty there. But all those old photos, I've seen so much of them in the last 15 years that I've forgotten what a bloody cheeky little, bloody good-looking skinny bugger he was. And, it was great to see him. I sent those off around a bunch of friends in the UK that hadn't seen him for a while, and wonderful comments coming back. And Gav Pickering is good, mate. When you see these photos, there's a Volkswagen and Gav and Jono. Hibs with his bloody cheeky little face, and Gav, all big smiles, and I was talking to Gav and he said, that car in that photo, bloody Jono gave it to me. So I was on the bones of my arse in Surrey, and Jono just came out and said, hey, Gav, you need this more than me. That's Jono, that's the Jono we all know. It's, give anything away. I mean, you never get to see him grumpy. Well, you try to get grumpy in his own ridiculous way. He's sit there and go, oh, I'm grumpy. And you go, don't be ridiculous, you're not. He's like, oh, I'm really grumpy. You say, no, that's just you pulling a face. And he goes, oh, really? Oh, maybe I'm just thirsty. Off you go to the fridge. But, one time I was down in Portugal and he gives me a call. Oh, the mate says, Magnus, I'm really grumpy this time. Now, I'm kicking Wendy out, I've had enough, can't do it anymore. She's just too bloody tough. And I said, shit, must be bad. And he goes, I'll tell you how bad it is, listen to this. And I hear this huge crash over the phone, and I said, Christ, what have you done? And he says, that's the toilet seat going up. As grumpy as he ever gets. But Wendy called Jonathan her warrior, always fighting for her, always had her back. Always keeping an eye on her. So spare a thought for Wendy, and without her warrior, because she's going to be toughing it out. But I've learned a lot from Jonathan James 007 Hibs, and he's taught me really simple things like be nice. Just be nice. That's what all he ever was. His huge heart, I think, probably just gave out through excessive generosity. You just be nice, ring your friends. Sorry, Luke, I know we used to ring you about bloody 3 in the morning and time zones weren't important, talking to his mates were. So, well, Jonathan, you remind me of you.
Thanks for organising this and thanks for inviting me. When you go through life, there are very few people which have a huge influence on you, and Jonathan was one for me. I arrived in London in 1987 as a backpacker and ended up working the same practice as Jonathan. And I was living with a cousin way out in Essex, and he said, well, you can come and stay. And I did. I mean, who wouldn't? In the middle of London. And he took me under his wing, and I said, how much rent do you want me to pay? And he said, oh, you can buy me a bottle of champagne every day. Well, the shares in Lansom went up, and we ended up drinking a bottle of champagne every day. And you got to know him over that, and it was fantastic. But his flat was the centre of this group of people in London, and the phone never stopped ringing. I can remember living in that flat and thinking, God, this is incredible. This is the most popular person I've ever seen. And he was. You know, the parties that went on, the food that was thrown, the alcohol that was drunk. Yeah, I had to move out because I couldn't stand it. I don't think anyone could stand it. And he wasn't perfect, you know. He liked Brussels sprouts. He actually liked eating Brussels sprouts. Now I still eat it. And he listened to Simple Minds, you know. So we did have a few things that weren't that we didn't like about each other. You know, I bought a flat around the corner, and as anyone knows about London, the rent or the property prices are enormous, and I couldn't pay my mortgage. Jonathan paid it for me. Yeah, I paid him back, of course, but yeah, that sums up his generosity. Yeah, he really helped. He did things that other people would never even dream of doing. Yeah, I used to use his orange VW all the time. Yeah, he really made my life into London pleasurable. I ended up staying there about 10 years, and that was partly because of Jonathan. He was, as people have said, very well read. I can remember complaining about London one day, and you know, how tough it was, and yeah, maybe I should go back to Australia. And I can remember the next day finding on the coffee table a book, Heart of Darkness, and inside was written, "Man's ability to suffer is greater than his ability to change." And it's something I keep with me all the time. I've still got the book. They could have made it a hardcover, but you know, there were Main Streets, for instance. He also taught me a lot about dentistry. You know, I had 2 years' experience in Australia, then I'd taken a year off to travel, and I'd forgotten a lot of dentistry. And he showed me how to treat patients. He had a book where there were 4 people in the practice. No one was busy except for Jonathan, because his technique with patients, or his ability to relate to patients, was better than anyone I'd ever seen. So I used to sit in his office and watch him work. And he taught me something that, you know, made me more successful than I would have been otherwise. And as Mark was saying before, you know, one thing I am going to miss is the SMS messages at 3 in the morning telling me that an Australian wicket's gone down. Or, you know, and you know, bloody Jonathan, you know, is a common phrase in my house, because you just, I ended up unplugging the phone in one Ashes tour because he just couldn't get to sleep. Over the last couple of times, going back to London was sad, you know, to see the decline of his health. And the last time I saw him was about 1.5 years ago, and to see someone who was a hero, because he was my hero. He was many people's hero. And it made me feel like this. The last contact I had was during the World Cup final in cricket. And it was a text message. And I think we can all relate to this. It just said, fuck, fuck, fuck.
One of our sailing crew, I was faced with having to stay in one of the stuffy yacht clubs there, having to have a tie on for breakfast and dinner and so on. And one of our crew said, listen, bring this mate of mine, Jonathan Hitz. You can probably stay with him. So I phoned Jonathan from Auckland, and he said, yeah, I've heard all about that, and you are staying with me. When you get here, get the train into, I think it was Victoria Station, may not have been, it was close to where he worked. Come upstairs, walk across the road, come upstairs, and I'll give you the key to the flat. So on arrival in London, it was a direct flight, one stop in LA. I felt like a piece of chewed string. Got into London on the train, And I thought, I can't walk over there, I don't know where I am. So I got a taxi. He drove me 300 metres. Took £5 off me. And that was that. Went upstairs, met Jonathan for the first time. And Jonathan said, now you can walk to the flat from here. You go past Kensington Palace, across the park, it's round the corner. Once more. It was a cab for me, but that was a half a mile. Another £5 down the drain. Jonathan said to me, when you get home, go and have a shower. It's not a very good shower. Have a shower, don't lie down. You wait there. I'll be home at 5 o'clock. This is 3 in the afternoon. And we're going out for the night to a pub. And so on. This theme went on all the time that I was in the UK. I stayed with Jonathan on and off for that 6 weeks, and we had a wonderful time. It's a bit the same theme as what you were all saying. You've all heard Jonathan. It was party time all the time, and I was forever grateful for Jonathan. He was a wonderful guy, and Wendy, and of course Rick Caldwell and Ash. Ash moved out of the flat, and I had his bedroom for the whole time. Rick and Ash showed me all around London. I had to go to customs agents and this one and that. Ash took time off work and helped with, and so on. We, after the Admiral's Cup had finished, I had to deliver the car back to London, the rental car. We had a sponsor. One of our sponsors gave us a container full of Kiwi lager. Bloody awful beer, but gave most of it away, but there were still 12 trays left, so that went back to Jonathan's flat, and I guess they eventually got rid of it. Rick might tell you about that later. The next time, I did keep in touch with Jonathan a lot over the ensuing years, but unfortunately not recently. The next time he came here, he and Wendy came out for a summer, and which you've already heard, I think that was around about 1990, I'm not sure. And Tim Gurr was away. Tim loaned Jonathan and Wendy his boat, Stratocaster. And I sailed with John a lot on that. We won an anniversary day regatta. There was a bit of prize money then, or there were vouchers. You could spend them at Sailor's Corner on an outboard motor, or whatever you wanted, or you could redeem them at the local booze merchant. And you can guess what happened. We get $800 worth of grog. We said, we'll give half of it to Tim. But I don't think Tim ever got any of it. So, anyway, that was my time with John. He was an extremely generous fellow. And I'm sure Wendy will miss him, but I will never forget him. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.